Okay. Sorry, I'm getting my little stream here. I gotta do a volume thing real quick. There we go. All right. And on a 3 count. Good morning. It's Sunday, March 28th. Last week, the discussion was about left-right divisions, how caste systems operate, and maybe how Americans' caste system looks like. Kind of diving into how Civil War divisions come into play today. What are the identities of today? How do they conflict? And how can they be used by opportunists and ideologues? So that's what we were talking about last week. This week, we're diving into what I find a very interesting video by Jonathan Haidt. This is a TED Talk lecture on the moral roots of liberals and conservatives. Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist, author, and professor of ethical leadership at New York University, STEM School of Business, and his main area of study is the psychology of moral values and moral emotions. In this talk, we're kind of look at this framework that he develops, and we'll put the video link in the show notes. This is about a 19-minute video. It's very interesting on how to categorize morality in a framework to kind of talk about issues today. And I start with a quote from Robert Heinlein. Your enemy is never a villain in his own eyes. Keep this in mind. It may offer a way to make him your friend. So this was this video, and before I kind of get the gist of the video, with today's, as always, Dave Salvo from Bloomington, Indiana. Welcome, Dave. Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday, Dustin. Thanks for having me back again. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. We had some great talks. We were actually talking about this earlier this morning, and we're going to kind of expand on it. But for anybody watching, the gist of this video from Haidt is about the 5 moral pathways. So we're all born with an innate ability to understand kind of 5 moral preferences. So we're not born with the morals, but we're born with the ability to understand it, the capacity, kind of like the capacity for language or the capacity for socialization. We all have this capability, but our environment and choices determine which kind of moral pathways we lean on. So this is about preference on a spectrum. And the larger point is that we are able to understand all morals, even if just in general, we prefer to concentrate on some. So we're able to understand the other side if we choose to. We're born with that way. So, and again, this is social psychology, so it's an exercise. It's not the truth, but I found it really interesting. And before we get into it, the 5 moral pathways that Haidt talks about in this video that I hope you do watch is harm care, fairness and reciprocity, otherwise known as the golden rule, in-group loyalty and cooperation, authority and respect, and purity and sanctity. All right, so let me go to my notes. The main question, like looking at those groups we were talking about in terms of like mass mandates and lockdowns, that was kind of a big general thing I think we all have opinions on, how that fit into those 5 areas, and how if someone holds one of those moral pathways above others, how would they justify or dismiss a mask mandate?
Okay.
So, Dave, your initial thoughts on kind of just that framework to get us started. Go ahead.
Sure. I think it's really intriguing to start from with the idea that we're not born blank. We're not an empty palette.
Right.
That we have. You mentioned language, and there's the concept of the mother tongue, right? So like when you're born as a baby, you have the capability to learn and speak any language.
Right.
Just because you're born in France doesn't mean French is the only language you can speak.
Right.
You're more likely to speak it because that's what you're going to hear and mimic. But you're born and for a number of years have an easier time absorbing language and mimicking so that you can learn a broader range of language and ways to express yourself. So applying that to morals and the growth of kind of our thought, our personalities, our how all of that plays in was really intriguing to me. And I thought throughout the video there were a lot of really thought-provoking um, uh, points that he makes and some examples he gives that aren't necessarily, they seem almost counterintuitive given our um, our current state of discourse or lack of discourse.
Right.
Uh, and there were definitely some things that were surprising to me. So I'm excited to continue to talk about it. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of really important uh, pieces that we can discuss that might help us, I think, with if we have the goal of really trying to understand people that have a different point of view than we have, maybe that come at things from a different, look at the world through a different political lens, for example, and maybe not even just exclusive to political discussion, although that's what we tend to talk about in these discussions, but broadly how we can kind of better understand and better communicate with each other, and recognizing that that not all, because it really is hard. We're living in this place where so many people immediatly, the default is,
Pick a
well,
side.
it's my side, for or against, very tribal, hyper polarized is the word that we use a lot. But trying to use these pathways to kind of find
Right.
areas of common ground and I think might be particularly helpful. So
Yeah, the thing that really got me interested, the first trigger that got me interested when I was watching this video the first time years ago, this purity sanctity element. So that's one of the pathways. And it was really easy for me, like first thought, I'm thinking of white nationalism and stuff like that. Of like, well, that's a simple, clear understanding of purity, group purity, and it's something I don't value, kind of thing. And when he starts talking about, well, people on the left have the same thing, I'm like, you're insane. I'm like, no. What about food? I'm like, okay. And I'm like, the food of like, you're making sure you're getting non-GMO, healthy, organic, hippy dippy stuff, and eat your vegetables, stop eating meat, like all these things. Like there is a purity morality in terms of food consumption on the left that is just as authoritarian in my academic evaluation as the white nationalist racist stuff on the right. Like they would see, it's very easy for me to see them see my food purity in the way that I see their American first purity.
sure.
It hits the same kind of notes, and in a much different fashion, but I can kind of see that when the food purity, this when you're talking about it like of politics and stuff, like this goes beyond politics. So it's like, when do you choose things? Like I know people who will only choose things that they can buy at Target of brands that they have a affinity for, like a group loyalty for, their brand affinity, and it's a standard corporate, like they like McDonald's because it's trustworthy, because it's the same everywhere. And I don't like McDonald's because it's the same everywhere, you know.
Right.
And so I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but
Well, I think in politics, if I can jump in here, and I think what I hear you saying is I'm intrigued by your use of the concept brand loyalty, because having been in sales and built brands and done some marketing, it's hard to build. Like, you have to work really hard to do it. So there's a lot of messaging, a lot of advertising, a lot of uh, massaging of language and ideas to get people to choose a particular product over and over again. And excuse me, to your point, there are people who, they, like you said, they shop at Target because there's either a perceived social value or perceived, maybe there's a perceived price value. I don't know. Maybe it's for some people it's status. It's some thing, what I want to be seen. That's where I go. I go to Target or whatever. But I think more broadly, in a political sense, there's a comfort and a safety for a lot of people, a warm, fuzzy feeling of safety. I go to this restaurant, I get this, what my folks would call the same old, right?
Yeah. It's safe. It's safe. Safety is appealing.
Yeah, I go to this Mexican restaurant, I get my chimichanga, and my margarita, and I know it's the same every time, and I like it, and I know that I'm going to enjoy the place because I've enjoyed it before, and there's that comfort that. And then there's, on the flip side, there are people who maybe that's fine, but maybe they're more interested in a new experience, seeing a new place, having a new experience, different food, something that's different. So that's that's a very.
I would go even further. The comfort is just the motion of new experience.
Okay. Yeah. And for some people, I think that's true. Like they're comforted by the fact that things are changing. Maybe like that's another kind of point of view. Like, ooh, I'm glad that it's not the same all the time. I'm glad that the culinary world has more to offer than the Mexican pizza at Fridays. Like,
right.
That thing's yummy sometimes, right? Like sometimes you just want to eat a bunch of Taco Bell, but you don't want everything to be Taco Bell all the time.
Right.
And so, but some people do. And so that's a kind of a fundamental comfort level difference. And when you apply it to politics and political thinking and social science thinking, and you really can start to see why people coalesce into particular groups, prefer particular activities or types of gatherings or types of, and then so it becomes all these little things. So these stereotypical things that we associate with conservatives or liberals. My dad, unfortunately, sometimes will default to these Southern country conservatives. I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of conservatives in New Jersey, right? Sure. Like, you know what I mean?
There are liberals in the middle of Florida.
Right. There are liberals in California. Everybody thinks, California, it's this liberal. Go inland, drive 40 minutes inland from the coast of California. It is red as hell out there. And so this idea that and I think Haidt talks about this in the video, and this was also interesting. I think this is how he opens, and I think it's important. Unfortunately, he gets moving pretty quickly.
Right.
Kind of gets missed.
Openness to new experience.
Right, the openness to new experience versus kind of that alternative that's everything is the same and it's comfortable, but we're led to believe, or we have taught ourselves to believe, that these political groups that we're familiar with are kind of monolithic, that they made up of all conservatives are simple, simple, earthy country, don't like books, disdain for school and education, and they're all gung-ho military, and they're all these stereotypes. And on the other side of that, all liberals are crunchy granola, organic juice, hypersensitive helicopter parents with bratty kids, and there's those people exist, but the truth is much more in the middle.
much more. And that goes into the making people better. This was that was a quote. That's the idea that you can't make people better. It's been around forever. My most recent favorite one was the movie Firefly, and it's very analogous to the Civil War. And it's like some people like they want to make people better. Like in that example, it was like genetic engineering and forced socialization. It was like, I do not believe you can make people better. That's authoritarian. You can suggest ways they can make themselves better, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. But
and even that decision is important too, right?
Yeah, you can't make them. Now, this was back to the brand loyalty. This was an interesting thing. Like Joe Biden is a great example of your brand loyalty. Most people were voting against Trump. So it's a bad question. But the brand loyalty was, well, we need a Democrat in there. I'm like, well, if your brand loyalty was to pacifism, you would never have voted for Biden, even if Trump was the alternative. Like, neither of them are pacifists.
Right.
So if your loyalty to the brand was that of peace and acceptance, you would have rejected both choices. But if you're on the brand of vote blue no matter who, okay.
Right.
So.
When I think in the video, he talks a lot about like loyalty and cooperation and this idea. He doesn't call it groupthink. I think he calls it like team think or something.
In-group loyalty, cooperation.
In-group loyalty and cooperation. And, trying to bring some of these things we've talked about now into sharper relief or focus about mask mandates and things like that, like we wanted to talk about. I'm finding this really interesting, almost counterintuitive idea occurring in my head, where you've got a political party, conservatives, who historically have made a big part of their brand messaging, if we're sticking with the idea of brand and brand loyalty, that they are stability, authority, law and order, states get to decide things for people, or not decide things for people, but states have a role to play. Society is better served with strong laws and institutions and things like that. And you have this question of mask mandates, and you have a lot of, not exclusively, but a shocking majority of the conservative population, whether or not they're voters, but conservative people who self-identify as conservative, certainly, strongly rejecting the idea that they need to cooperate with other people and wear masks for public safety. This idea of public safety and cooperation, despite the fact that there are people in authority telling them that is what they should do, recommending it, that it's maybe in some places a law to do so. So it's interesting to me that a lot of the things that Haidt found in a lot of his studies and are kind of borne out in our anecdotal day to day. It just seems counterintuitive. It seems like conservatives would be people who would be most likely to say, you know what, the government, the state told you that you need to do this to keep people in the state safe. You need to do it.
Right.
And then it might be touchy-feely granola liberals being like, you can't tell me what to do, big brother. I can
Right.
wear a mask if I want to because I'm an individual. And
Yeah, yeah, this gets into the in-group loyalty and authority aspects of that. It's interesting because we have to throw in the propaganda too, because it's not when we say, scientists are the authority and we should respect science. Okay, that makes sense to us. That's an appeal to authority that works for us because we've accepted that. But if you have a group that has been, in their mind, mistreated and lied to, then the scientists aren't the authority. Trump is the authority, right? This is the in the horseshoe theory where we can connect with the people in the quote right who reject mask mandates. It's getting them to say like reject laws is okay. Trump is not the authority. The Constitution you love is the authority, and Trump is going against the Constitution, kind of thing. So it's what is the appeal to authority that you value that I can appeal to, and it's constitutionality, and then it's difficult because we're going to get into active listening. It's difficult because at that moment we should understand who they think the authority is. The authority is their celebrities, their Trumps and their whatevers, who are, in some point of view, right in saying those people treat you like crap. They are not your group. They are an other. They are not the authority. And this, if you don't think about it too hard and you stay angry and anxious, this makes sense to me. Of like every time somebody on the news is talking about science is basically calling me an idiot, what are the chances that I'm going to continue listening? Right? So we need to change. I think that the in is changing that who is the authority. The authority shouldn't be Trump. The authority should be the scientists. But how do you get them to, and it should be the Constitution. It shouldn't be the GOP, you know? So it's more of how do I use their buzzwords and trigger words, and because I know when they start talking about the Constitution, they get a lot of headway with their own people. And so maybe I should be talking about the Constitution and not how Trump's crazy. Like, don't even mention the authority I'm trying to reject. Try to, again, get them to eat their vegetables and be excited about it by saying, remember that Constitution you love? I love it too. Yeah. So,
and that's the truer, that's the mechanics of what everybody loves to talk about rhetorically, which is let's find common ground. And right. But that's the mechanics. What I hear you saying is that you're describing the mechanics of how that actually works, right. And why it's difficult. I mean, you mentioned active listening. People don't want to be told they're wrong. People they don't like that. People resist. People have a hard time coming to it on their own, let alone hearing it from somebody else. And so when you're having a discussion with somebody, the trick is to really listen. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't agree with them, you have to listen and you have to hear them out. And I think so much of it is, well, the liberals think I'm dumb because I'm country, but country isn't dumb. Right. We have to listen and make that person feel seen and heard and validated. Just listening and telling them, look, I hear you. I hear how it makes you uncomfortable for somebody to tell you what to. Oh, it's funny. It makes you uncomfortable for somebody to tell you what you need to do with your body. That's fun. That's interesting. Yeah. That's curious. All right. So, and that's another way, like it works both ways. So now you've opened up this two-way pathway. I hear you. And I get that. I get that because in the same way that you think it's weird that women get to do whatever they want with their body, like it works both ways. You think it's weird that you have to make a medical decision that somebody else is forcing on you.
Right.
Now take that insight and apply it to
Apply
what
to the
we've been
masses, yeah.
saying. And,
I
and
like doing this of the, it's the, how do I know you're right kind of thing. And this is where we're looking at these moral pathways of come up with the moral argument that you don't agree with, that, or at least it's not your preference, but demonstrate that you understand one, that from that point of view, that's right. And that you understand that that's a possibility. You don't reject it out of hand. And also, this is, I don't know if it's manipulative or what, of I'm going to talk about purity and sanctity and a moral approach from the right that I can disagree with but respect. I'm going to talk about that mainly because the person on the right is not saying it, but it is something we can connect. Like, we usually talk about what we're against, not for. And when we talk about again, it gets all defensive. Like, I can, like you just did, list out all the things that they can be against my thinking. Like, that's easy for us.
sure.
It's how do I do what it's for? How can it be on, like, and when you start doing that, you break them down from just being defensive to actually declaring their moral principles in each of these 5 different areas.
Mhm.
And now you feel like, okay, even though we disagree, we're moving forward, we're not attacking each other.
Right. I think that makes sense. And I think when you do that, and I could be wrong about this, but it feels right, that when you encourage somebody to state their platform, so to speak, to talk about what they're for, it's talking about what you're against is reflexive, right? Like, that's a
Yeah,
reflexive thing.
absolutely.
When you're talking about what you're for, you have to slow your thinking down a
Right.
little bit and articulate it, which means you have to think through it again for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the idea of you learn more through teaching than you do through
Yeah.
being taught, right? Because you have to slow down and think about it and figure out how to explain it to somebody. Generally, that gives people new insight, or at least opens up
Right.
that possibility. And
Or
so,
at least takes down defenses.
sure, right, you become less defensive, and you're in more of a sharing mode, like an educating, sharing, connecting mode, as opposed to a put up your defenses, build a wall, an
Right.
emotional wall, and no, you can't convince me, and then you become entrenched.
Right.
I say we as people, and I think that's kind of a natural, unfortunately, natural
Yeah.
response we've.
I had the best success, especially in 2016 election. When I only talked about what I was for, people listened and started talking. But when I started talking about what I was against, it went nuts. I didn't go anywhere. When I started only talking about what I was for, they didn't hear the trigger words. They didn't pick a camp. They didn't, like, it was just an open kind of thing. It wasn't a threatening thing. And it turned out and this is discussions between radical leftists and traditional liberals. In that discussion, when I was only talking about what I was for, people tended to again talk about what they were for, and I had to keep steering them back because they would immediately go back to, well, I'm against Trump. I'm like, yeah, I get it, but what do you want? And what I found was too is the people I know I'm wrong, and so I'm still sorting through this, but on the liberal side of the cosmetic commercial liberal side is they're only reacting. I only heard things they were against. I didn't hear anything they were for. And once the very few instances we could shift and they start talking about what they were for, one, they didn't really know. They haven't examined their principles. But if they did, we all agreed. When we're talking about what we're for, we agree. When we talk about what we're against, we pick identity politics and all this crap, and we start fighting.
That stuff happens, right?
It was interesting. It was interesting as hell. So I would like to talk about like mask mandates I would love to kind of, what would be a positive moral stance on mask mandates from each of these five things and from both groups. So again, the leftists tend to concentrate more on the harm, care, and fairness, reciprocity, or the golden rule. The people on the right tend to concentrate more on in-group loyalty, authority, and purity, that kind of thing. It's kind of, let's do all 10
Sure.
for mass mandates. So first one is harm care. Like should be easy on the left. Harm care is, okay, this is a viral disease, high infection rate and a mortality rate, and we need to, even though I might be okay, my parents might not be. So I want to put I want to do less harm to them. I want to do more care for them. That is an easy thing for me to think of.
Mm-hmm.
Now, harm care, first let's go to the negative on the right. Like how would they value that the least, I guess? It's how would they dismiss that value? Why would the value of even though it doesn't affect me, it affects other people, how do they dismiss that quickly? And then I'll ask, what would be a positive version for them? And the dismissal should be pretty easy. We've all heard the dismissal argument, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there seems to be this kind of personal choice argument. So there's the personal choice argument. There's the kind of what I call doubting Thomas syndrome. It's you can't see it. So you don't really believe it until you see it. So you think about somebody like Chris Christie is a great example. He has actually recently come out and been very vocal and said, I was really skeptical. I was a vaccine skeptic. I was a COVID skeptic. And then I got sick and that shit's no good. And I was really sick. You need to go and wear a mask and get a vaccine because you don't want this thing.
Right.
So, having a kind of a kind of Saul on the road to Damascus where the scales fall away, that's like that might, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, that could be like an authority where we can talk about
that. Is a bit of an authority. But it's also this harm isn't happening to me, so it's not real.
Well, it accentuates the idea that it could happen to you or it could happen to anyone. And having a spokesperson like that kind of helps a bit. And I think those are ones of, personal liberty, I don't believe it's real. You've got the particularly religious element of, not that there are not religious people on the left, because there certainly are, but this more fervent strain of evangelicals and kind of disbelievers in terms of people who, frankly, they believe that God is a better vaccine than Pfizer.
This was that one of those instances of, if you could talk about it without mentioning anything sciencey, you would probably get a lot of people. But once you say science, it triggers, nope, I'm religious, science is my enemy.
Curiously, Crooked Media picked up on a study that was done, and I'm gonna not remember, but I'll look it up and we can put it in the notes. We can link to it. But they did a series of like a focus group interview thing, and they had multiple spokespeople talking about the importance of getting the vaccine. And I think they used primarily conservative voters, and they wanted to the idea of the test was to really measure self-identified conservative voters and their resistance to pro-vaccine, pro-mask messaging. And they used a few different spokespeople for the same message, right? So they used
nice.
And so they used, the message was, the COVID is real, masks are proven to prevent spread of the disease. The vaccine has a high level of effectiveness and is very safe in 99% of people. 3% of people have any kind of major thing, whatever, whatever that statistic. And they used, let's see, I think they used like Chris Christie. They used, who else did one? Some conservative House member. It might be the guy. I'm not gonna remember his name, but they used like a conservative House member, a politician, a House member, a senator, and then there was a scientist. It was a kind of an apolitical scientist who works for um, somebody. And so, and again, we can link to this, and I'll look up all the references. But what they found was that the most effective person to deliver that message was actually the scientist. That they
deliver it to whom?
To the conservative voters.
Conservative, okay.
To the self-identified conservative voters.
Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that.
That it was a very counterintuitive result. People thought that would not be, but that when you stripped away what they gathered from the study was that the more politicized the science message is, the less accepted it is. And then so if you strip away the left-right part of it and you make it only about the real science, and you don't, and there's no politics, then nobody feels judged for their political feelings. It's simply about, this is how this works. And it's spoken to these people as you're presenting them this information and you're allowing them to take it in. So it's not a political person saying, oh, the left that thinks you're dumb about science doesn't want to tell you, or whatever that message is. If you strip that away, then people aren't defensive, because you haven't got their hackles up about, oh, well, the liberals don't think I can understand this. You bring them, you treat them like
conservative people understand viruses, and I'm sure they hate them. Right. Do just like I hate spiders, and they do too.
Right. Yeah. The idea that conservatives are inherently stupid in some way is stupid. Like it's not.
One of the most interesting things was about when we can't understand why conservatives vote against their own interests. This was an interesting thing, and I'm like, no, they are voting their interests. It's just the fact that if they lose money, they're picking a higher moral thing. They're not voting against it. They understand how money works, but they want something else even more. Like they want the individual right to choose, even though Medicare for All would save them money.
Right.
They are voting their moral values.
Money isn't the lever. It's the idea that's the lever. Right.
Yeah. So this is, and then on the harm care about masks, so the morality of harm care, of do no harm and care for others. It's an interesting, another strategic way is I would talk to a liberal about conservatives' mask mandate reactions through a harm care lens. I would not talk to a conservative about that. I would talk to them about a in-group loyalty kind of thing, or authority respect kind of thing. So the example is, if I'm talking to a liberal, I kind of thought I almost had it of the, these masks are to prevent harm from others, and that's important to you. You're not kind of totally in self-interest. Now, the conservative is thinking, okay, well, if you take away my individual right to choose, that is harm to me. So a liberal should understand how, because we start on the harm morality, the harm care morality. So talk about conservatives in that language. But I would never talk to a conservative about, well, the liberal can understand you are talking about being harmed by having your individual rights threatened. Like I wouldn't go in that with a conservative. A liberal can understand that. But for a conservative, if I was saying about, your you're talking about in-group loyalty. So this is, as you said, if somebody says, well, Republicans are stupid on science, it's like, well, you've just created a separate group, and that's why they're not taught. That's why you're
Sure.
engaging, because we just divided groups and said you're on the wrong side. And so I would tell a conservative, this is kind of an in of, I would tell a conservative, well, what I'm trying to tell liberals is you're not crazy. It's the corporations that are screwing with, like I always bring it back to labor versus capital.
Sure. But what if we did, like, what if you could, for example, maybe an argument that you could make toward a more conservative individual, self-identified conservative individual. Okay, you're not wearing a mask to protect me, even though you are, right? Like, even though that's a benefit, that's a side benefit. You're wearing a mask to protect your family. That's your group loyalty. You have loyalty to your family, the older relatives in your family. You're a family values person. You want to keep your kids and your family and your wife and your daughter safe or whatever. So let's think about it as you're going to do this thing. You're offered the choice to do this thing that will help keep your family safe. I feel like that's a good way, rather than to try to make it more about a group effort and make the family the group and separate it from the political tribe and say, here's your family tribe, right? Here's your thing, aging with maybe you have and somebody would say, oh, well, kids don't really get this thing. Well, I don't know, your daughter's diabetic.
Right.
She's more susceptible, right? Now, is it a personal choice, or do you have a moral responsibility to your family group that you value to keep them safe by making this sacrifice? And I feel like that's kind of a way in, and it eliminates the political part, because it's the political part and the left-right division that seems to make everybody particularly defensive. That's where everybody's hackles go up, and they're like, oh, well, because you're a liberal, you're just trying to get me to wear a mask. Has nothing to do with my political leanings. I would like to see you wear a mask because I would hope you would keep yourself and your family safe. And I'm also happy that I might benefit from that.
Yeah. But, and then that's the thing of like, I think what Haidt was trying to say is don't start there. Like, the harm care thing is your moral preference. It's not theirs. They don't care about it as much, is the point. So you start with one of their moral preferences and then establish trust so you can explain your moral preference from their point of view.
Sure. Okay.
So what would be a way of mass mandates about authority and respect? Let's start there. That's like, the authority should be science and the HDC? No, the CDC. The authority should be, our response as a nation, kind of thing. And this I don't know how to define it, because again, these aren't my moral preferences, but between in-group loyalty and authority. And you saw this when liberals started talking about national pride. They tend to not talk about that because they feel it's a trigger word for nationalism, right? But when you talk about, it's like we all can have pride in America. Like,
sure,
it's okay.
Right. So that doesn't necessarily make you a raging nationalist, right?
But when a person on the right might hear that as a conflict with in-group loyalty, because if I'm criticizing the United States, you may interpret that as me hating the United States. And on the left, we say, no, I criticize it because I love it. If I didn't love it, I'd leave. that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right, right. That's the response to the, well, if you don't like America, just leave. Well,
You know, it's
I
like, no,
would.
I like America. I want to make it better. Aren't we supposed to
Right,
participate? Yeah.
right.
So what
But
would
I'm here.
be so the in-group loyalty cooperation in terms of mask mandates? Again, I think I'm not
Still
sure.
think family.
Yeah, family.
What about what about church? Like a church community.
I think it's that we're all in this together is a strong kind of thing. You have to break through the you've decided that the other side is an other, and you kind of have to break through that. So I don't know how to do that, but I'm sure there's ways. Um, but in terms of what is a positive moral, well, so this was they're called calls to morality. So what would be the in-group loyalty call to morality to wear a mask? And the first thing in my head that pops up is we're all Americans and we're all connected. So we need to protect the group. And maybe how I would go about that is,
Keep America healthy.
well, I would lean in on the aren't you guys supposed to be the alphas, right? Like, why
Oh,
don't
nice.
you show us the example of how to cooperate together in this instance, of how to be Americans? That's how I would go about it. It's like, well, how do you be an American about this? Like, an American about this, you know? And like, especially when you start looking at other countries and things, of well, okay, what is the American way on this? And then the American way is not. You have to keep coming in. The American way is not. Well, there's a problem. I'm going to ignore it. You know, use a little guilt and shame there of like we as Americans can figure this out. So as an American, you want to protect other Americans, right?
Right.
You
You
know,
say, well, you say you want to protect your country and your way of life, so do it by
by wearing a mask.
doing the American
Yeah,
thing. Right.
yeah. Now on the left side, this is where I watch a lady named Kim Iverson, and she's really cool. She's more of an analyst than a pundit. She does a lot of research. She's really great. And one of the things that came up, and I never feel comfortable talking with anybody on the left about, is that the data seems to suggest, the impartial data seems to suggest that the lockdowns were a mistake. Now, when someone on the left hears that, and I'm going to ask your reaction, they're very confounded because it's like our instinctive reaction, again, is what are you talking about, you crazy Nazi anti-vaxxer person? I'm like, the data, I'm just looking at the data of different countries' policies and their numbers. And while there was a slight effect, it wasn't great enough to say lockdowns are entirely good or lockdowns are entirely bad. And then when I was listening to scientists, they're like, if you can do the lockdown at the very beginning, then do it, else figure something else out. The lockdown was really in terms of thinking of how a biological organism works. You
Right.
only got a short window. And when you miss the window, you've missed it.
Rapidly shrinking and a rapidly narrowing window of
Yeah.
time to
Yeah.
implement that, right? And which we didn't.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess my reaction would be, and my question, the question that I would respond with, what kind of mistake? Was it an economic mistake? Was it a social mistake? Was it, or was it because there, I mean, because it seems like there is some data to suggest, depending culturally, Italy, for example, unless you keep people apart and make them stop hugging and kissing each other every time that they meet, culturally, that's what you do. Like that, then, I mean, if you just let people continue to do that, everybody's going to continue to get really sick. So in that case, isolating people a little more stringently probably made some sense and probably helped. And I would guess there is some scientific data to suggest that. In other places, smaller places where the culture is different, or there's not as many people, or people are already naturally spaced out, it's also possible that you don't need an extensive lockdown in Montana or Wyoming because people are already relatively distant. They're already,
well, like India, very dense population. I think they tried it for a bit and then stopped and switched their focus on dealing with people who get it. So I forgot what the word is, but it's the treatment. They focused on treatment, not lockdowns.
Not prevention.
And if you look at the different numbers, like Sweden didn't have a lockdown and they have the same numbers as we do, like we have different numbers for probably a different reason, which is our fucked up healthcare system, but that's a whole other topic. But when you're actually breaking down the numbers, and there were actual different policies and procedures from different countries, we didn't hear about it much in the U.S. because we don't like it. But like in India, they did more on, they took the lockdown away and did more on treatment. So if you did this, then we can help you with the treatment. They're the same kind of thing of like the best form of lockdown, a scientist would say, and they said in the beginning, is, okay, identify your vulnerable populations, then isolate them. Like the whole point of the lockdowns, the major point of the lockdowns was not to cure the disease. It was to make sure hospital capacity could keep up.
Could handle, right.
Now, the United States failed because of our medical system of, okay, we bought ourselves some time, but did not improve our capacity.
Right. We didn't use the time that we bought very well. Right. There was a pretty massive opportunity cost to all that. I mean, I think, I feel like there's this connection when you're trying to figure out a way to have some of these, like, how do you get to that loyalty and cooperation place? Like, how do you appeal to that and kind of get there? Because
I think you were already saying it of like, don't go in of what you're against, only say what you're for. And it's also understanding what are the trigger words of both sides, try not to use them. And then it's finally like going through this rubric of, all right, what could their moral values be? What is their strongest moral value? Let me start addressing that. So I'm going to, and so it's effort. It's effort, but it's also active listening and things of like, well, okay. One is have the conversation, because a lot of us don't have a conversation with someone who disagrees with us morally. Right. So, like, I don't know many gun nuts. Just don't. And then the second is like, okay, well, am I having this discussion to yell at somebody or make myself feel right? Or am I having this discussion because I want to learn and grow? And learning and growing requires you to be uncomfortable and maybe even finding out you're wrong.
Oh yeah, that's the whole point of like
intellectual humility.
Like I tell my daughter all the time, you go to school to learn the right answers, not to have them, right? You don't have the right answers when you walk in the door. You ask questions in class so that you can figure out the right answer. So like, don't expect that every time you give an answer to the teacher, you're going to be right. You're almost certainly going to be wrong. And that's the point of school. That's the point of learning. And so I think it's easy to forget that. I think, we get older and we think we know stuff, but the world is constantly changing. It's changing around us and underneath us all the time.
Yeah. So the in-group loyalty thing, like I do the approach of, oh, how American can we be? Let's be awesome and go there. And try not to say it sarcastically. The authority respect too is like, I want people to get to respect scientists. Like you said, if you took out all the buzzwords, they do. So I have to, that authority respect is reminding people who the greater authority is. And this kind of ties into reminding people who the greater enemy is. Like if we could just stop and agree that the capitalists are the enemy, again, you think the way I do, stop and agree the capitalists are an enemy, then I'm going to have a lot more in common with people on the right and the left. Like that, I have 99% of the people are going to be on my side, But on purity and sanctity, this was a tougher one for me. Like, what would be the purity, sanctity, like the thing that
I
we
mean,
discount when we hear it as a left, and then later on the right, what would be a positive appeal to morality and action in the terms of purity and sanctity. So, what might be something the right would say to you that sounds purity, sanctity, that you're like, hey, that's not the biggest thing right now? Is it the vaccines are fake? It's fake news? Is that the purity,
yeah,
sanctity?
like
Or,
that the science is fake, that you don't need vaccines and stuff, that you can live naturally and live off the land and be off the grid and be independent.
hmm,
You can make those decisions, and that if you keep yourself strong and that you live that, and it's kind of like, I mean, there's two, it's not that far off from the idea of green living and the hippie
hmm,
granola. I'm going to be on my Peloton all the time and I'm not going to eat GMOs.
right,
Like there's some common ground there.
right,
I'm not going to eat, I'm going to eat grass fed beef or whatever. And I'm not a hunter and I don't like guns, but I want to eat grass fed beef. And then there's the hunter, the conservative, kind of going out hunting, killing my own food. It's like, yeah, I just killed my own grass fed
right,
meat. It's called a deer that
right.
I have my license to shoot to every year.
But you caused that deer harm.
I'm eating clean just like you are, right? And I'm growing my own vegetables and canning my own things. So it's a
Yeah,
self-sufficiency thing. So there's an overlap there. And I feel like I feel like one kind of mocks the other, but they're not very different from each other
yeah.
in terms of the goal, which is put something in your body that you feel like you know where it came from, that you sourced out
Mm,
yourself so you feel good about it or whatever. Um, you made the two groups might differ about how that product gets to them before they prepare it, but the goal and the desires is kind of the same. So something like that, there's something about independence. Again, I feel like it all kind of funnels back to like personal choice.
right. Well,
Um,
there's the vaccine thing of like, um, talking about food purity into your body. I can see well, vaccines, I don't understand them, so they're impure and they're coming in my body. I can also, now these are more trigger things.
what
These
about
are
what about
excuses to
vaccines make you
continue your own cultural war.
is
Yeah.
there an argument maybe we could make that vaccines make you stronger or more prepared to face things in the future?
Yeah.
If
Well,
you
this
know,
was my I'm hesitant to bring up against liberals of like, because again, I don't want to be called an anti-vaxxer. I just it's less about like I'm going to get a vaccine hopefully next week, but and if I have questions about it, it's not me being an anti-vaxxer. It turns into more, okay, I had a question about the vaccine because I don't trust corporations, but now my big issue is your response to me. Now,
right.
my big issue is I start questioning vaccines doesn't mean I'm an anti-vaxxer. I believe in vaccines. I also know corporations want to screw us over. So I'm not allowed to ask the
You're
question.
not suspicious of the vaccine,
Oh,
you're suspicious of the people who make it.
right, right. But if I'm not allowed to ask the question, I can't even go there without being shouted down by people on my own side. What are the chances I'm going to switch sides? They're a little higher.
Right, right. You're right.
But I think on the right, this can be taken advantage of in culture wars of like they want Bill Gates wants to microchip you. It's the same thing of like, what are these vaccines? The vaccines will give you autism. You know,
Right.
I can see these being used.
They've got nanobots in there
Yeah.
and they're gonna take over your body.
And if I don't think about it, and if I stay in a heightened state of fear and anxiety, I totally get it. Bill Gates is coming for me. I get it, understand it. I don't subscribe to that, but like I'm on the side of like, okay, I know corporation like this vaccine is probably good, but I also know it wasn't a quick rollout from an open source vaccine grouped together by all scientists in the world. This isn't Star Trek. This was okay, we've had vaccine work because we've had these kind of viruses before. and I've got a couple of different drug manufacturers, and they're all competing. So they're all kind of giving me the same drug, but they're kind of different. And did they rush this through? What are the side effects? Like, this is all kind of new. Like, this was the same thing when I was with the HPV vaccine. I get the same kind of blowback of like, okay, I get vaccines. I understand. I support vaccines. I don't want polio either. So, but this vaccine was, okay, I see it. Who are the players in here? Oh, these chemical companies. Yeah. Do I trust them? No. Can they do good work? Sure. Do I trust them? No. So you're going to entertain the question. And then, all right, well, now these people are getting, oh, well, these girls are getting the disease from the vaccine. Like, I forgot how the whole thing played out. But I'm like, okay, I believe in the vaccine. I don't appreciate the side on the left that says, no, you immediately get it, no questions. I'm like, okay, take a breath and see how maybe that reaction might make someone on the right think of you as an authoritarian Nazi.
Right.
I'm like, everybody, same thing I do every week is everybody calm the fuck down.
Take a breath.
Take a breath.
Step back. Right. If it makes you feel better, take your breath through your mask. If it makes you feel better.
Well, the last thing I'll say on the mask thing was, it was, I think the biggest thing was like, wearing a mask makes you look like a pussy. Like that. To paraphrase and super generalize,
right? That it makes you look funny or look weak, right. Or right. I think there's also some racism. The people in Asia have been wearing masks regularly during cold and flu seasons for a long time. So I think there's some. I mean, to me, it seems fairly obvious racism of, oh, we're going to look like we're going to look like an Asian culture. We're going to look like they look in China or Japan or whatever. And I just think I think that's a part of mask resistance because it's not something we've done. We haven't accepted it as part of something that we do. Whereas for years during peak flu and cold season, people just wear masks there. That's something that they do. This has been a concerted and long time effort of propaganda against China anything. So these days, the right hates China and the left hates Russia. And they're both kind of manufactured propaganda for the war machine, in my opinion. But I'm outside of it, so I can hate everybody. And I think there's some legitimate geopolitical concern. Oh, absolutely. Raised, but most of us don't study it days on end, so we have to generalize. Right. We're a little more inside. That's a little more inside baseball for people who do pay more attention. But yeah, to your point, I think that's correct. The respect part was for a positive call for people on the right. It's to get them to downplay it's Chinese or European effeminate or whatever you're selling out to some subgroup that's making you weaker, as opposed to how can you show that you're the stronger man, the bigger man? Like, be the breadwinner, make the tough decision. Make the tough sacrifice. Showcase your strength. So that's the respect part of the authority, respect, morality of like, all right, well, you keep saying you don't want to do this because it makes you look weak. I want to tell you, no, do it to make yourself look strong. Right. Or to be actually stronger. Like if you can there's a way to make the argument, be safer and stronger and more secure. If strength and security are a value, then you can make this choice and be stronger and more secure and safer so that you're not compromised in some way. The rest of the world's going to laugh at you. They're all going to laugh at you. But are you tough enough to put up with that laughter and show here's your opportunity to show them they're wrong when they laugh at you by being strong and sticking to the thing, stick to your guns, whatever cliche you want to pick. But I think that's good. I think that messaging that sounds theoretically pretty promising. I think would be a good point of positive intersection. So you're definitely bringing up in a lot of the ways that you're talking about it now. You really are starting to touch on cognitive framing, and I had talked about that book. I think there's a cognitive scientist, George Lakoff, used to teach at Indiana University, and he's written some of the seminal works on cognitive framing and brain science, and how it works in how our language and the frames that we apply to everyday situations affect how we feel about things, how we behave, how we respond to other people. And one of his more accessible books that deals almost exclusively with messaging in politics is called "Don't Think of an Elephant." And what are you thinking about right now?
uh,
About
horse built by committee right now, but
horse built by committee. But in a way, you're still thinking about an elephant. Like, what's the picture in your head, right? So if you,
I gotcha.
so if you say "Don't think of an elephant," immediately
You
that's
think
the
of an
picture
elephant.
in your head.
Yeah.
And so it's this idea, and so he dives into this idea of how political groups broadly respond to different frames. And so one is more of, like you're talking about, a kind of a father knows best frame, a more action oriented. There's a decider, there's a problem, there's a decider. The decider addresses the problem and fixes it. And that's kind of the father knows best. I think he jokingly or somewhat seriously calls it the father knows best action movie Arnold Schwarzenegger frame, right?
Sure.
There's this problem. I don't have to think about it and discuss it much. I see the problem. It's obvious to me. I'm going to go fix it, and I'll worry about whatever else later. We got to fix the problem through action, forceful, direct action. And one person's going to decide, right? There's the one decider. And then there's the kind of authoritative, Brady Bunchy kind of frame where it's not just you wait till your father gets home and he hears what you did at school today. It's when your dad gets home, we're all going to sit down and talk about what kind of trouble you're in. So there's a more consultative group, collaborative parenting, problem solving, that kind of frame. And that generally appeals to centrists and liberals a bit more. And not always, but generally those are. So if you frame things using those kinds of that kind of language, those kinds of themes, you can kind of understand how people from different political stripes are going to respond to them. And I think a lot of what you're talking about and kind of finding these intersections for these moral pathways and finding the in to facilitating discussion and understanding the other side and kind of having that discussion. I think there's probably it would be worth digging in a little bit and thinking about the framing that that you're using, because I kind of hear you doing it as you're going, and I think probably I am too, but I kind of hear you doing it, and that's what a lot of this seems to be about. Like, what's the most, frame it as, this is America. We solve problems. We do this. We get this done. Built America tough, right? So that's America. F yeah, like that's what we. And so
use it.
That's kind of the way in to frame the argument or whatever, and again pull the politics out and just make an appeal.
Moral argument.
Yeah, to make a moral appeal or moral argument, or at least an appeal that's going to get them there, and that's going to access those established moral pathways. You're not going to force them down a particular pathway. They're already predisposed to go down it. You just have to get them
there. Yeah.
And you get them there through persuasion and through, I think, making, like you're saying, making these things a little more evident.
Overtures,
people don't go where you want them to go because you tell them to.
Right. Unless you enjoy being yelled at. Where there's a small subset of people.
Yeah, people like having options. We like having options. Unless it's the Cheesecake Factory, because it's 100 pages and still nothing.
Oh my goodness. Well, this has been fantastic.
I'm gonna get some hate on that one probably.
A little bit. It's been fantastic, and I do want to over the next couple of discussions, I want to come back to that moral framework, and we won't get into the video, but more of just those 5 levels or whatever. The moral pathways are an interesting way to dissect an issue. And then hopefully we can get into the next discussion about cognitive framing. I do really want to talk about George Lakoff's book
Mhm.
But this has been really exciting, and I hope we can start looking at the moral justifications people have in their own heads when we come into disagreements and polarization in the news.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds
All
good.
right. All right. Well, this has been Sunday, March 28th. Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's almost April. Enjoy the spring weather. And
You
we're
too.
we're gonna find that truth.
Right. We keep looking for it all week, and we'll see what we discovered in next week for sure.
There we go. There we go. All right. Well, thank you so much. Hang on.